Uh, a very good morning to all of you. So I take this opportunity to present our experience for PodStunts. Before I start, I have a confession. It is just like all of us in the hall, most of us will have a four-wheeler driving license. So the feeling of doing a PodStunt is you have a license, but you are asked to not drive a car, but a truck. So that is how you feel when you go to the theater. Now I dedicate this talk to the parents of Jara who came yesterday and presented. This is to just show you that what was her PA pressures on table after intubation. It was 214 by 85 versus systemic pressure of 140 by 78. This is the last case we have done. So I don't want to, I mean, things are easy. All of you know now over last 1.5 years what is pH, and we know the survival curve of pH. So I'll just keep all this initial part. And we need to know the RV function, which Prashant and Dr. Kulkarni, they really follow this whole assessment so judiciously to make things easy for us. After undergoing the whole battery of tests and excluding other secondary causes that needs to be addressed and treated in a different way. Now, I want to highlight that in the last World Symposium of 2013, there was a consensus and the treatment plan for IAPH, and nowhere PodStunt had a mention there also. It was atrial septostomy and lung transplant. This is only 2013, 6 years, before this whole story. And you heard so many speakers talking about pharmacology. We have now almost 16 drugs, new drugs available, with so many new one like Selexipag. Yesterday only they are saying they are going to launch it in India very soon. So we know that it's a multi-modality treatment of both lifestyle change, medications, and interventional procedures, and some surgical procedures. So when you look at the surgical options, many things has been prescribed, but finally everything lead to lung transplant. So we will be talking about two procedures that really make some sense because others have died down. So one will be atrial septostomy or a flow regulator and PodStunt. Now it's important, it's proved that atrial septostomy does cause improvement in the LV preload, improves the cardiac output and oxygenation, but it is definitely at the cost of desaturation of the coronaries and cerebral circulation, which has been proved by many world series. This is the worldwide experience. So it's a compounding of all the series, and if you look at the mortality, it's close to 22%. That is the average mortality. Of course, it includes all the class, from class 2 to class 4 patients. So atrial septostomy does not cure or reverse pH, and the worst part is, as the time goes on, the effect of what you achieved on table, it wears off. That we have already seen in the last two talks. So that's why the flow regulator has come. We got to see how it is really performing over a period of time. And I am surprised that there is no cerebral and coronary issues with the previous talk series, that was presented right now. Now we all know that with the Eisenmenger, what we are trying to create, it's a better situation because the pulmonary artery pressure drops a little bit. The PVR remains same, but with that same PVR and same high pulmonary artery pressure, you have got a low RA pressure and you have got a better cardiac index. That's why it's the old wine in new bottle. Started off in Paris by Liebrandt, the concept. So we thought of applying that whole thing. So the rationale is that here there is a decompression of the pumping chamber or the RV, where you are not really causing desaturation of the upper body, which is more important, coronary and cerebral. Rather, the desaturation is downstream, so to the muscles or the lower part of the body. So the target of PodStunt is that at the end of the procedure, you should aim that you have 10 to 15% desaturation of the lower limb. So that will surely improve the RV function. It will obviously make the LV ease, so less pancaking of the LV. So CVP will drop definitely, and if you have a NRS monitoring in the theater, you'll see there would be improvement of, saturations in the oxygen delivery to the brain also, the regional, delivery. Now the most important thing is how to do it. Yeah, the concept is good, but actually it's technically, it's a, if you want to write down the surgical steps or do it, it's totally different than what happens in the theater. And as a cardiac surgeon, all of us are much more comfortable about doing extremely complicated procedures on CP bypass. But this is one operation where CP bypass is a very questionable thing. And from the previous experience of the literature and our own experience, personally I think one should not go for a CP bypass support unless you are pushed to the corner and you want to salvage the patient which you have taken on table and want to put him on a support ECMO. So, because CP bypass does not go with these lungs. They are totally different lungs. At the drop of the hat, you just give heparin, they start bleeding. So, that is one point. So, avoid using CP bypass whenever you are thinking about doing a port shunt. You have to have that confidence to do it without the support of bypass, number one. Number two, you can show in a MRI or a CT scan that they are very close. The arteries, LPA and aorta are very close. In reality, it doesn't happen so. In a especially little grown-up child or in a teenager. That's one. The second point is, even if they are closer, to get them and get the anastomosis right is not technically easy. And the most important point is, when you want to do a direct anastomosis, as it is described earlier, you are clamping two vessels. So the patient is not going to tolerate the clamping of both pulmonary artery and aorta simultaneously. This is a point on which my personal or our personal preference is that we do sequentially. And we use a graft. The graft is a smart thing to use as described by Firoz Edgassi. That's because you can really plan, do all the discussions in the cath meeting and choose the size. And that size remains constant because that is exactly going to guide you what size you want to achieve. So if you look, all of you, it's very simple procedure. If you really look at it, it's thoracotomy, and you just go through the fourth space, dissect out the branch pulmonary arteries, the LPH, especially the terminal branches, and loop them up. And then you need to clamp it horizontally and make an incision corresponding to the size of the graft. So what we do, gradually up with some experience, we have realized there is no need to really loop around the LPA. Because the more you dissect, the more you are likely to go into the LPA. Here it is a situation, you have an aorta which is like 3 to 4 millimeter thickness, and these PAs, they are just like 0.3 millimeter. They will break at the drop of the hat. They are just like 2 cell thickness. So we try to loop just for safety the distal branch PH, and the main LPA we do not loop nowadays because it's a huge vessel. So there is enough to clamp and get a room to sew the graft. So this is the modification that we have achieved. And if you see this picture, there is a incision making corresponding to the graft size, and then you can quickly suture down. This procedure will take around 15 minutes in normal speed, and then you can use some sealants there to ensure there is no bleeding subsequently, and then you have to size the graft. So you can see from this diagram, the length of the graft is actually not that big. So they are closer, but at the same time, you got to very carefully bevel them and make the size of the length appropriate. And then after making the length appropriate, you need to, by that time, your clamp in the LPA can be released and that graft can be clamped. So you are releasing the LPA or the strain on the heart, on the RV. So you finish one part of the procedure, and now your clamp is in the graft itself, so not hampering directly the LPA flow. So that is like taking rest in between. And then you come to the aorta and you clamp the aorta, and again you make an incision in the aorta, and after you make an incision, you suture that other end of the graft, DAR that, and then you can release. This is how it will look at the end of the procedure. So if you look at it schematically, it's a graft between the LP and the aorta of whatever size you do. And this all has been, the series. I don't want to repeat that again and again. There has been extensive, advantage of the patients they have taken through. They started with 8 patients. You can see clearly the pancaking of the LV, improving to normal function of the LV. The arterial desaturation of the upper limb and lower limb was initially 10 to 15 to 20%, which gradually passed up to a gap of 8 to 10%. And they have reported the largest series of 24 patients of course, 2-3 hospitals. And they say both in the midterm, with short-term as well as their long-term of almost 8 years follow-up, they had good results. So the Paris group believe that it may be preferred to balloon arterial septostomy as it effectively decompresses the right heart without causing arterial desaturation of the cerebral and coronary arteries. Now, the world experience till date is the same group which reported 8 cases initially and then 24, and then there is a group from America who was Edgassi group. They reported 5 cases. Actually, they have done the updated unpublished data is around 15 cases. And after this, one Russian group also, they published around 8 cases with 2 mortality. So the most critical point to decide in this is what is the ideal size of the graft that should be chosen for a particular patient. Now, as per the publication of Dr. Firoz Edgassi, which appeals to me personally, it's he takes I don't think there is a lot of science behind it, but it's more of probably experience. So they choose around 10 to 20%. This is a huge range, 10 to 20. 10 to 20% of the descending aortic diameter, so it should be less than that. Now, from our own experience, if you read the literature, it says it should be unrestricted flow. The flow should be completely unrestricted. So, you will be tempted to go more towards a larger size. But I think, slowly I'm getting to believe that probably you should have room that you start up with a smaller size and have allowance to dilate that or stent that down the lane. So this other Russian group, which has published in 2017, they have a formula which, we have not applied, but what they say, you look at the pulmonary artery and aortic pressure ratio. So if the pressure ratio is between 1.2 to 1.5, then your graft to descending aorta cross-sectional range should be between 0.5 to 0.4. Now, if the pressure ratio is higher, then it should be less than 0.4. That means what they are saying, if you are having more or higher PA pressure, then the graft size should be lower. That is their way of looking at it. So I think it is still, the jury is not out what is the right size. So I'll just share our experience. So we started off this 3 years back, and the first case, after Prashant came back, we did that, and we did that patient on CP bypass, the first case, and we had a totally different experience. So total number of patients we have done is 13 females, and the mean age is around 10 years. The mean weight is 21 kg, and most of them were class 3 and class 4. And this only thing, we had very different regions of the cause for the PH. So if you look at them, mostly 11 were idiopathic, and 2 were secondary to connective tissue disorder. 1 was post-operative VHD, and another child who had an intact septum TGA got operated by us only at 4 days of age. This child continued to have persistent PH, and he is the other odd one. So all these patients, they obviously were treated on dual pulmonary vasodilators for some time till it was realized that their pH is not getting controlled, and one of them we tried even ileoprost. So the other thing is, 2 of our patients had initially suprasystemic PA pressures. With drug therapy, it was controlled, and one child belonged to a social strata where they could not afford the drugs. So we thought we'll go ahead with pot shunt, where the PA pressure actually had dropped down less than the systemic. We thought it will rebound back. So that was one. And there was history of syncope in quite a bit of patients, and we had all their assessment, as I told you, with the RV pressures, RV assessment by echo. In 6 of them, we had all the cath data, and we measured our BNP and all those 6-minute walk test as a protocol. We prepared these patients in the preoperative way by stabilizing with milrinone, sildenafil, sometime NO by mask also. And in all cases, postoperatively nitric oxide was used, and serial BNPs were done to look for the progress as we did that. And surgical techniques, we followed the same thing. So the first case of ours, we tried to do it through thoracotomy on bypass. So this patient, we first put femoral cannulation, turned the side and did it through left thoracotomy. And what happened actually, we probably landed up with a retroperitoneal hematoma and acute limb injury. We could do the port shunt. And this child, I mean, he was a 21-year male. So he was shifted to the ICU, but he didn't make it. He had low cardiac output and bleeding, and he died after almost 28 hours. So after that, we changed our protocol, and we realized that if we are going to do it, we are going to do it without bypass. And subsequently, we have our own smaller variations. Like I told you, partial clamping of the LPA, not looping it, and sequentially doing it and using the graft. And NRS monitoring and monitoring of PA line on theater, as you have seen that. So this is our modification. This is exactly how it looks in the theater after the procedure is done. And if you look at our results, we had total 4 deaths. So the first death was the man on CPB. The second time we realized another 31-year-old lady who the moment we started clamping the, before we clamped the pulmonary artery, when the heparin was given, she probably bled in the lungs that time itself. And it was very, very difficult to clamp first, and multiple manipulation and handling of the PA. It resulted in more hematoma, and this lady also, we lost almost just within 24 hours. So after that, we changed our protocol to not give them heparin, because these are all big anastomosis. So that was the second change we did. And after that, we have lost 2 patients, and one patient was a 17-year-old lady. She had a VHD, closure done, subsequently she had PH. So her technical part and surgical part was okay. She came back to the ICU, got extubated on 2nd post-op day. On 4th post-op day, she was on heparin for maintenance of the graft. So for whatever reason, she bled into the lungs, and that was massive pulmonary hemorrhage. We could never, get her out. That was one. And the other thing is, it's a very, I would say a decision, technical decision. 11-month-old child, I got tempted to put in a little more size, oversized graft. I think we don't get 7 here. We don't get a 7 millimeter graft. Unfortunately, we get 6, 8, 10 like that. So I put in a 8 millimeter. And this child, of course, was having right to left shunt, but sometime he had left to right shunt in the ICU. So he was deceiving us. Over a period of 7 days, we struggled with all possible type of manipulation, could not figure out what exactly was going on, and finally we lost this child on 7th post-op day. But otherwise, all other patients, 11 survivors, they are definitely, they have improved their functional class, they have improved their, these are the average ICU day and ventilation days. So all of them, their functional class was better, the TAPSE score was better, RV fractional change was better, LV eccentricity index also improved, and the RV to PA coupling also improved. Pro BNP numbers came down, 6-minute walk test, they have been much better. Medication wise, there was improvement in the number of drugs they are taking, and except for one patient, I think most of them, Prashant will know exactly, they have come down on the number of pulmonary vasodilators we are giving. We had to re-intervene in 2 patients. One child, where I told you that we tried to do it with a subsystemic prepressor, this child continued to have left to right shunt in the post-op phase. And she came back to us 6 months, he was on follow-up, so 6 months down the line, we had to go back and band that previously created 8 millimeter shunt to maybe 4 millimeter. She is okay after that. And one of the child with the TGA had a LECOM procedure. So the LPA was still further away from the aorta. So we had done the graft, and in this child, it appeared by the CT scan and angio, there is a slight angulation at the descending aortic anastomosis side. So they successfully put a stent and took out that angulation, and that child is doing quite okay after this second procedures. So port shunt might be an exciting palliative procedure for severe PH, and in the short term, it definitely improves the functional class, decrease the number of medication, and improvement of RV function with RV to PA coupling. So what I learned is, it should be done maybe early in the course of a clinical course before the right ventricular deterioration develops. And it should be considered in any child with intractable PAH, irrespective of etiology. And the other thing is, it should be, of course, considered instead of prostaglandin, because the cost of prostaglandin is prohibitive in this country for sure. And mind you, if you are doing a pot shunt, you are not taking out the scope of doing a further transplant. We need to just go in and clip it during the procedure. So, in the revised publication of 2017, like the flow chart for IAPH, now pot shunt is described as a destination therapy or as an alternative to arterial septicectomy or prior to lung transplant. So the key is we have learned that the preserved RV function is the key. So if you try this out in a very extremely advanced RV dysfunction, you may not succeed that. So timing that is not easy, but this comes with experience. Thank you for your patience.